One quick note before we start this session. This session will be recorded and will be available on our Facebook page. And so, along with along with all of the data sets that we'll be using, all of it will be available to you after the session. And so, just a quick heads up. All right, I think let's just give it about one more minute and then we can get started. Because this particular workshop is going to be based around data visualization, the primary tool that we will be using is Microsoft Power BI, and we'll be providing all of the data sets, and we'll also be doing a walkthrough as a part of this workshop of how to go about importing all the data sets, and a walkthrough about how you can do some ETL processes, as well as create some visualizations and dashboards as well. So I think that's about time. Let's get started right away. Okay, nice to meet you guys. My name is Daida, and I'll be hosting the data visualization workshop today. And some of the main things that we'll be talking about are as follows. So we're first going to take a look at what data visualization is, and what it actually entails. Next, we're going to look at some use cases about how it's actually being used right now in industry and the effects it's having. And finally, we're also going to be doing a demo where we'll be taking a data set and then we'll be walking through the entire data visualization pipeline, from importing in the data set and then doing some ETL, extract, transform, load transformations on it, cleaning the data, and then we'll also be doing we'll also be creating data visualizations to go along with it. So just so I have an idea about the level and the background of everybody that's coming to this, if you can quickly say in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and share with the rest of the team, what level of experience do you guys have with data visualization, and what tools have you guys used in the past before? So you guys can message on the chat, or you can raise your hand, or you can say it out loud as well. Okay, I'm not hearing anything, so I'll assume that everybody is a beginner. And then I'll start from there. Okay. So what is data visualization? So the academic definition of data visualization is that it's the graphical representation of data. And if you think about it, we've been doing data visualization since we were way back when in elementary school, when we first started off making our bar graphs, our pie charts, our histograms. We've been exposed to data visualization from that age onwards. And it's important to note that data visualization is more than just creating bar graphs or pie charts or whatever the case may be. It's a way that you can express the data that you have in a graphical manner, so that everybody from different walks and different backgrounds can understand the data and the story that you're trying to tell. At its core, data visualization is about storytelling. You can have the perfect machine learning model. You can have some really great insights, some really valuable data. But if you aren't able to communicate your findings, and if you aren't able to communicate your insights to other people in a way that they understand, then your data is not going to be as impactful as it could have been, and you're going to be missing out on some opportunities on the opportunities that the data gives you. And it's very important. And so why do we have visual representations of the data? Why is it helpful? The main reason is that visual representations of the data help us bypass the language centers of the brain and leverage our ability to recognize patterns and perform visual analysis. So what this means is that typically speaking, when we're looking at data, it's typically presented in its raw format. It's typically presented to us in the form of a massive Excel file, a massive CSV file, a massive database, SQL data warehouse, whatever the case may be. And this data comes to us in the form of a table. And while tables are really useful and they're great for presenting large amounts of data, it makes it hard for us to actually dive in and identify insights and identify long-term patterns. Not only that, representing your data in a tabular format also makes it hard to see and identify opportunities for growth and shortcomings. You have to work very hard, and you have to be what you would normally have to work very hard for to identify, you can identify very easily using a visual representation. So some common types of data visualizations are bar charts, pie charts, box and whisker plots, Gantt charts, histograms, scatter plots, and heat maps. And the entire point of, and so it's very important that we choose the correct type of visualization for the story that we want to tell. For example, if you look at these two visualizations over here, they're both representing the same bit of information. They're both representing the population growth rates across population growth rates. And if you look at this particular visualization on the top over here, what it looks like right now is that the Americas have a higher growth rate than Africa or China or Asia Oceania, excluding China. And so this is misleading, because if you actually look at the numeric values associated with each slice of the pie, you notice that that's not the case. Americas actually have a lower growth rate than all of these different slices of the pie. And so what this illustrates is that if you don't choose the right type of visualization, the message that you're trying to convey can be lost. And it's very important to take a step back, and before you start doing any type of data visualization or analysis of that sort, or put together any dashboard of that sort, it's very important to take a step back and understand what story you're trying to tell through the data. And so in this particular example, a simple bar graph conveys the message that we're trying to tell much more clearly, and it's much more easy to interpret than this fancy looking pie chart. And so the entire point of data visualization is to give people the ability to take a look at the data and identify insights from it. You want them to be able to look at the visualizations that you create and essentially say, now I see it. And that's the entire, and kind of guide them through that entire thought process, that story that you want to tell through your visualizations from the very beginning to the very end, and kind of help them see the story and that you're trying to tell. And so this raises the question that yes, data visualization is very helpful, but many times statisticians would argue that you're able to identify these insights, identify these trends through mathematical processes, through statistics. However, that's not always the case. And so a famous example of this is Anscombe's Quartet. If you look at these four graphs on the screen, you would notice that all of these data sets, they're very different. However, if you look at some of their key metrics, such as their mean, their variance of both the x and y axes, if you look at their correlation and as well as the linear regression line, they have nearly identical stats. But when you look at it visually, do you realize that these four data sets are actually, in fact, very different? One of them follows kind of like a curve, kind of like a parabola, almost. Another one is almost a perfect line with one outlier. Another one has all of its points across just one x coordinate, and then with the exception of one outlier. And so what this essentially illustrates is that statistics go a long way, but go a long way and kind of help us break down our data. But they're not. When you look at it from a visual perspective and you do some visual analysis, you would be able to identify things that you would normally otherwise miss when you're dealing with statistics only. And so that's why it's very important to do this type of visual analysis. And so we've looked at why it's very important to dive into data visualizations and essentially how stats are very helpful, but they only tell you one side of the story. And so this raises the question of, okay, so we know that data visualization can help us identify previously unknown insights. So how do we go about doing data visualization? So there's, if you look in the market right now, there's many different tools and programming languages which cater to this particular industry. You can make data visualizations using Python, using R, using a variety of different programming languages. You'd also find, if you look in the industry, you'd also find that there are many different tools that you can use, such as Tableau, Power BI, ClickView, so on and so forth. And so what's the difference between each of these tools? The primary difference is that it really depends on your use case. Commercial BI, business intelligence tools such as Tableau and Power BI are great for putting together interactive data visualizations at a really fast rate. And a great thing about using these types of tools is that you can also that they're very intuitive for end users to use, and you can also develop them so that they update so that they dynamically update on a regular basis, both when prompted by the user as well as on a automated schedule. In addition to that, when you use tools like Power BI and Tableau, there's not as steep of a learning curve when it comes to learning these tools and starting to use them. In addition to the fact that they also allow the end user to be able to dynamically filter and play with the data themselves. And so this is something that we don't see when we create visualizations using traditional software and statistical packages such as Python and R. When you use those types of tools, they typically have a steep learning curve, and they're not as intuitive. And the visualizations that you end up creating as the end result, they tend to be static, and to change them or to update them can be tiresome, and which is something that we want to avoid moving forward, because because they require a lot of maintenance, and companies overall don't tend to like that. And so some key areas in which data visualizations like this are being used are financial services, the financial services industry, the sciences, transportation, and healthcare. And so in the financial services industry, they're primarily used to kind of give you a broad overview of your business pipelines, and a prime example of this is a mortgage funding pipeline. Recently, with the COVID-19 pandemic, many banks, especially in the States, have had to have had to process a lot of loans, and a way that they used to track their progress, see their key metrics, was through creating dashboards and visualizations for their entire funding pipeline. Another way is that, especially in healthcare that we're seeing right now, is performance metrics. And so hospitals typically use data visualizations to track their long-term performance and key metrics. So not only to help them in the reporting purposes at the end of their reporting periods, but also to kind of guide them on a daily basis guide them on a daily basis and kind of see where their processes are breaking down and immediate areas that could use improvements. Another industry which uses a lot of data visualizations is the sciences. And so data visualizations are great for analyzing spatial properties. And so spatial properties for different molecules and amongst different structures. And because it's one thing to be able to look at all the data that you have on it in a tabular format, but when you're able to look at it in a 3D from a spatial perspective and kind of visualize the physical processes that are going on, it makes the analysis portion much more easier and much more easy to interpret, especially for non-technical users. Lastly, data visualizations are also used extensively to identify travel patterns. Travel patterns among for both international travel when you're taking flights, as well as for domestic local travel. And so a great example of this is that Uber regularly releases its data visualizations regards to their trip paths and things like that, which really puts emphasis on data visualization and this whole entire industry. And so now that we have an understanding of the different use cases as well as what data visualization is, let's dive into a demo. And so the links to the data sets can be found on these two can be accessed through these two links, and I'll leave the links up, and then I will also be walking through the demo on demo shortly. So I think it would be a better idea if we took these two links and put them in the chat that we have so that everybody can access it. Just bear with me for a second. So I put both of these links in the chat, and you can feel free to access these data sets and follow along with the rest of the tutorial, rest of the demo. Okay, perfect. Okay. So the tool that we're using is Power BI, and if you're new to Power BI, you can it's available for free to us via our student accounts, Waterloo student accounts. So if you just do a quick Google search and go to powerbi.microsoft.com, this website right over here, you will be able to download it for free by clicking try it free, and then by downloading, downloading it from here. Okay, and so the first step in the data visualization pipeline is first to get the data. And so Power BI makes it really easy, and they have this nice little icon at the top. And so oftentimes when we're working in, we'll find that the format of our incoming data is going to vary widely depending on where we're getting that data from, and and how we want to access it. And so Power BI has a lot of different connectors, which allows you to connect with many different types of files, ranging from Excel, PDF files, access databases. You can also connect to, we live in the world of big data, and you can also connect it through other to cloud providers. Primarily, because this is a Microsoft product, they have active connections for Azure. But if you go on to but if you go, but you can also import in your data sets from a wide variety of sources such as Salesforce, Google Analytics, Adobe Analytics, GitHub, and so on and so forth. And the great thing about this is that new connections are being added on a daily basis, on a regular basis. And so every time that you log on, you're going to find some of these beta connections over here, which are kind of like the new connections that they've released. Okay, I noticed that there are some access issues. Let me see if I can correct those right now. Is everybody else also having a similar challenge? Okay. Just bear with me for a second. Okay. Okay. Can you guys test this link and let me know if that works? Okay, perfect. I will also add in the other file, the link to the other file that we'll be working with, and we can go from there. Okay. Let me know if if you guys have any trouble accessing these links and the data sets. Okay, perfect. And so the first step of the data visualization pipeline is getting the data. And so we'll be connecting to our data. If you guys might have noticed that one of our data sets was an Excel file and the other one was a CSV file. And so if you click on the get data icon right over here and click on the Excel file, you'll notice that it would direct us to our local repository. And we simply have to select the file that we want to import in and do further analysis on. And so the file we'll be using is country pops. So if you click open, as you may notice any moment now. Okay, shortly a pop-up will appear. Okay, it's here. Which will essentially give us an option to preview each tab within our Excel sheet and decide whether we want to import it in or not. And so the data set that we'll be working with from this particular file is the population by country. So if you simply click on it and you select the load button, it will create a connection from Power BI to that particular data set in your local repository. And once it's loaded in, we should be able to see it in the fields section right over here. So usually it's pretty fast, but my computer is incredibly slow, so there are some delays. Okay, so now we can see that our data was loaded in, and a great thing about Power BI is that you can also perform some transformations on your data. And so we can do that by simply clicking on the transform data icon right over here, which opens up Power Query. And so that's what we'll be doing next. Okay, so now that we have Power Query open, you'll notice that Power BI does a lot of scan before as it loads the data set in. It kind of scans the data set and assigns it a data type. And so as you can see over here, it did a pretty good job identifying the rank as a numeric data type and the population as a numeric data type. One thing that it didn't identify as well was the date column. So if you notice right over here, if you click on this icon at the top, it'll tell you, you'll realize that that this particular column, Power BI recognized it as a text type. And so the type that you see, so the icon that you see over here corresponds to these types. And you'll see that Power BI recognizes the date column as a text field. And so we can very easily convert that text field into a date field by simply just clicking. And it'll ask you if you want to replace the current step or add a new step. And so that's one important thing to point out about Power BI. And so there's no, and when you're in the Power Query editor mode, there's no undo or redo. The way it works is that it adds on additional steps. And so if for right now we're going to, it adds on additional steps to your transformation process. So if you click Add Step Now, we can illustrate. So the first few things are just what it does, just the steps it takes to import in the file itself, and then if you click on any one of the earlier steps, applied steps over here, it will revert the file back to that particular step. And so one important thing to note is that if you delete an intermediate step over here somewhere, that step is gone forever. You can't undo it or you can't redo it. If you delete something from over here, that step would be gone forever, and your file would then revert back to what it was if that step was never applied in the first place. And so for us, that doesn't really have a big impact because we've only had to apply in one step as a part of the transformation process. But you can imagine the impacts it could have when you're dealing with very large data files and you're doing your transformations in Power BI. You're doing some data cleansing, some filtering, and all that kind of stuff. It can if you change the order or if you delete one of these steps in between, that can break your query, which is something that we don't want. So that's something to be careful about when you're working with Power BI, especially. And so once we've made these changes, we want to apply these changes back into our original file. And so you simply click on the Apply Changes button, and it takes you back. Okay. And at this point, let's also import in our second file that we had. And so that file was a CSV file. And so quickly importing it in. Okay, we can load it in right now, and then we can also, once it's loaded in, we can see if we want to do some transformations or not. You click on Transform Data to see that data the data that you loaded in, and determine if you want to apply any transformations on it or not. And so if you look over here, Power BI did a good job of identifying the types of these different columns. And so we can leave it as is, and we can just say close and apply. Okay. The next step, the next step in the data visualization pipeline, once we've obtained the data, is to model the data, is to identify any relationships that exist between the data sources. And so if you click on this third tab right over here, that'll take you to the model view. And so what this model view does is that it helps you build relationships between the different tables that you have, imported in. And so this is great when you're working with more complex data sets. And it works wonders, especially when you're dealing with when you're importing in data from databases and data warehouses. Another thing that you can control as a part of the data model is a type of relationship that you have. So if you right click on this particular connection and then click on properties, you'll be able to see that there is a many-to-one relationship right now with the, and this table and the GDP table. And the GDP table is currently filtering the population by country table. And so what we want to do is that we want to change this to change the cross filter direction to be both, so that regardless. And so what that does is that allows you to filter the GDP table GDP table by the by the related field in the population by country table. Just click OK. And so data modeling is a very big part of data visualization and data warehousing in general. And that is something that that we'd be more than happy to talk about in depth in another workshop. And if that is something that you guys are interested in, feel free to message on our Discord group, or leave a suggestion on our Facebook page. Okay. So now once we have this data model built up and ready, we can dive into creating visualizations. So a quick view around the Power BI the report panel. So on the left, on the right, you'll have the fields column, and followed by the visualizations and the filters. And the great thing about this is that you can get started in Power BI even if you don't know anything about what visualizations are. And you can do this very easily by simply just dragging the fields, dragging any field, and just dropping it on the canvas. And so one of the first things that we'll look at is we'll create a visualization that highlights the population sizes across the different countries. And so you'll notice that I've pulled in the country field from the GDP table, and then next I will pull in the population field from the population by country, and I will put that in the size field. And so you'll notice that despite these two fields being from two different tables, we were able to use them to create one cohesive visualization because of the data modeling work that we done earlier. And so it's very important to be very vigilant when in the data modeling stuff, because if you get your data model wrong, or if instead of it being having a cross-filtering relationship of both, it has a cross-filtering relationship of single, it can have a big impact on how your visualizations work and how they look, how they turn out at the very end. One important thing to note is also about the summarization of this particular field. And so if you look beside the population field, you'll notice over here it has like a sigma symbol. And so in Power BI, when you see that sigma symbol, that implies that it is a numeric field, and you can apply different types of summarizations to it. So and you can toggle between what type of summarizations you want applied by clicking the drop-down menu right over here, and by selecting what type of summarization you want. You can either do the average, you can change it up, do the average, or do the minimum, maximum, a distinct count or a regular count, things like that. So this is super helpful when you have to this is super helpful when you're doing things like when you're counting the total number of sales that a particular store made, and then and at the same time you also want in another part of the visualization, you also want to do add up all the monetary amount, add up all the money that was generated, add up all the revenue that was generated from that particular sale. Okay, and so now that we have this visualization, there are some things that we may want to change or tweak around. And so so this can be done very easily by clicking on kind of like the paint roller icon right over here. It's the formatting tool, and you can control the size of the bubbles that you have, and then make them really massive. You can make them really small. And one thing that is really helpful is the title. So you can also change the title, change its font color, font size, alignment, all that stuff, and format it according to your needs. Okay, so so now that we have a visualization for the population by country, we can also create different types of visualization. Using all of these different icons that we have, all of these different types that we have over here. And so as a quick example, let's say that we want to create a tree map. And so we can create a tree, and so we have that tree map, and we want to see the GDP breakdown by region and how that works out. And so if you look over here, you would notice that over here, without doing any sort of changes on the summarization features for the GDP per person, you'll notice that Europe has the highest GDP per person, which Europe has the highest GDP, and North America has one of the lower GDPs. And intuitively, this doesn't make sense because intuitively this doesn't make sense. And so if you do some further analysis, you'll find out that this is because we're taking a sum of the GDP per person. Because Europe has far more countries which have a higher GDP on average, which have a high GDP on average. When you add up all those individual GDPs from all of the different countries in Europe, you end up with a GDP per person for Europe that's far higher than the GDP per person for North America, which has fewer countries and therefore has less elements which are being combined to get to that final value. And so a good summarization for this particular visual would be the average. And so once we do the average, it settles down into what we might normally expect, with North America having the largest GDP, followed by Europe, and then the Middle East, Australia, so on and so forth. Lastly, let's say that we also want to create a pie chart of the GDP breakdown by country. And so to do that, we simply drag on the country field and then change the type of visualization that we have to a pie chart. And then to identify, to see how it breaks down in terms of GDP per person by country, we simply drag that in, and then we can choose the type of summarization that we want. And so as you can see over here, this because we have a lot of different countries in the world, this visualization becomes kind of hard to make sense of. There's a lot of stuff going on, and it's hard to identify which country is being represented where. And so maybe what might be more useful in this particular case is to look at only the top 10, or maybe the top 20 countries, and the GDP of the top 20 countries. And maybe that would give us that would make the visualization easier to interpret and see. And so to do that, we would go on this filters pane right over here. And what this filters pane allows us to do is that it allows us to toggle and change the filter for this particular visualization. And so we can have it so that we're only seeing the GDP per person in Afghanistan, for example, or we can filter by individual entities, or we can also change it up and filter for the top end values. So let's say we want to see the top 20, let's say top 10 countries who have the largest GDP per person, and we want that summarization to be the average. And so we can very easily do that. And once we have all that set up, it's just a simple matter of clicking apply. So if we look over here, if we look at the resulting visualization that we see over here, it's much more easier on the eyes and much more easier to make sense of. Okay, so now that we have all of these, now that we have these three different visualizations, what it and so one great thing about Power BI is that you can dynamically filter things. And so let's say that we wanted to see only, let's say we wanted to see the top 20 countries, the GDP of the top 20 countries in Europe, for example. So we don't have to go about applying any different special filters or anything on this particular visual or on this page for that matter. It's just a simple matter of clicking on that particular tile in the tree map that we created earlier. And what this does is that it filters, it zooms into this, it zooms the map in, and it also highlights the areas, highlights the countries in Europe which are in the top, which are in the top 10 for GDP per country. And so that's one way of doing it. Let's say, what if we wanted to what if we wanted to filter based on, I don't know, the year, for example. To do that, we can either do that by adding the year filter. We can add the year field as a filter, as a page-wide filter or a report-wide filter, or we can simply just drag in the year field over here and change its visualization type from what it is right now, a clustered column chart, to a slicer. And so in Power BI, a slicer is just a fancy way, is just a fancy way of saying filter that you want on your report page. Okay, so now that we've changed this type to a slicer, it's giving us kind of like this drop, kind of giving us a checkbox, kind of checkbox style, which is something that can be very tedious when we want to highlight, when we want to kind of see the data for a range of years. We're not going, it would be very tedious to kind of highlight it for every small year, which can get tedious. And so another way we can do this is by simply changing the slicer type. And so, let's say we want to filter it based on year. And so right now, what Power BI did was that it broke down the year field into by year, quarter, month, and day. And so we can get rid of all of those extra breakdowns that we don't need and simply leave it as a year. And so now that it's as a year, we can then change the slicer type by clicking on the top right corner right over here and selecting the between field. And so what this does is that it gives us like a nice slider tool that we can use to slide around and see the populations for that particular slide, and see the average GDP per person for only between those years. And as you can see, this does dynamic filtering for all of the associated fields. Okay, and then so now that we have kind of like now that we've gotten our feet wet, what if we want to do some further analysis? We want to create a scatter chart. Sorry, let's say what if we want to create a bar chart, sorry, a line chart, which measured the population in country over time. So for that, we simply drag in the date field right over here as the axes, and then we can drag in their population as the values, and then population as the values, and then we can break it down by country. And then we can break it down by country, or we can break it down by region, which may be more insightful and easier to make sense of. So as you can see over here, if you look at it across the different years, you'll see that there was a big spike in population in Asia in 2014, and this may just be reflective of the data set that we have, of the errors in the data set that we have, or things like that. And so one great thing about Power BI is that you can not only create, and so once you've created your dashboard or visualization, you can also publish it onto the Power BI website. So to do that, simple matter of saving. So Let's call it tutorial and save it on our desktop. And then if you click on that publish button, he'll ask you if you where you want to publish it on your Power BI on your cloud version of Power BI. So you simply click your workplace, select, and once it's finished publishing, we can travel to the web version of Power BI. Okay. Before we go there, one quick thing. So Power BI not only allows you to build such visualization, you can also add in kind of like a AI component to it as well, AI ML component to it as well, by adding in this Q&A feature. And so over here, you can use this feature to ask it different questions, and it will do the math, and it will give you the answer to your question. So this is really useful when you're presenting your dashboard to your business users. And what this does is it kind of helps them ask questions to the data themselves and get instant feedback without having to submit a request to create a brand new report. Yeah. And as promised, let's navigate to the Power BI website. Sign in. Okay, perfect. It's just signing in now. So if you navigate to the Power BI website and click sign in, if you look under My Workspaces, you should be able to see it. Your reports should come up. Here we go, tutorial. So if you go on My Workspaces and then go under Reports and then click on Tutorial right over here, you should be able to see your the report that you've built online through a cloud platform as well. And a great thing about this is that you don't need to have Power BI on your particular machine to be able to edit this report. You can edit it you can edit it within the cloud environment as well, within this website environment as well. There will be some limitations regards to the data modeling and the transformations you can apply to the underlying data, but you will still be able to build your visualizations and filter them accordingly. And so that was kind of like a quick overview of Power BI and the different types of visualizations we can build, and how we would go about and how we would approach a data visualization problem from the very beginning, getting the data, then transforming the data, creating your visualizations, and then publishing it to the web, where you can share your dashboards and your reports accordingly. That concludes this workshop. If you have any questions, I will be sticking around where you can ask in the chats, or we can talk about it. And if you have any feedback, we'd be happy to hear from you as well. And you can message our so for the feedback, you can do that by messaging on the Discord group or messaging our Facebook chat bot. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. I see there's a question. All right.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Is now a good time to ask questions?
Yeah, go for it.
So when you were back at the Power BI, I guess, web page, it had like dashboards, reports, workbooks, and data sets.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask what the difference between dashboards, reports, and workbooks were.
Yeah, for sure. And so if you look at a dashboard is essentially it gives you kind of like a high level overview of your underlying data. This is kind of like what the end user will see. And over here, it's important to note that when you're in a dashboard, you're kind of limited to a semi-static view. There is still the feature of there is still the feature of being able to see the data and get all the tooltips, but when you're on this particular dashboard, that's all what you're limited to. If you want to do any further analysis, so for example, if you want to see the total revenue by region north, you click on that, and it would take you over to your underlying report. And it's in this underlying report where you can add in all the filters and do some further analysis that way.
Right. So then you just made a report, right?
Yeah. So what we did right now was that we made a report. And so if you go over here, if you go on the My Workspace, you notice that the report that we just made came under the Reports tab. And then if we wanted to convert this to a dashboard, we could do that we could do that as well. And so that's something that we can cover in, and that's something that we can cover in another workshop if that is something that we're interested in. Mm-hmm. And the workbook section was essentially the underlying data set that was powering this report or this dashboard, the Excel workbook. And then data set kind of presents it to you in a different format.
Right,
to my understanding. Yeah.
Is there like, can there be a many-to-one relationship between dashboards and reports?
Yeah, so you can actually have a many-to-one relationships between dashboards and reports. And so if you go over here, you should be able to have you can do drill down. There's a drill down feature, which allows you to drill down further into your data, and a drill through feature, which allows you to drill through to other pages within your report. And so I'm not entirely sure if you can have a many-to-one relationship between reports and data and your dashboard, but you can have but you can do those drill through features and drill down features within individual reports and within one dashboard. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. So if you like update your report and you have like two dashboards attached to that report, will those two dashboards update automatically?
Yeah. So if you were to let's go back to our Power BI website, and so let's say that we updated this. Let's say we updated our test report and our tutorial report, and and so let's say that they were driving this consumer profitability sample report and the copy of that. If you updated either one of these reports, these dashboards would automatically update. You can also set it so that the reports themselves, their data is refreshed on an automated basis. So you don't have to go in and click the refresh button on the underlying data sets in Power BI manually. You can also automate that. But if I remember correctly, I think that functionality is only available in the premium version, which is paid. It's not available in the version that we can download as students for free.
I see. Okay, thanks.
No worries, happy to help.
I had another question about data cleaning. Like, is that something that Power BI can do?
Yeah, so data cleansing is something that Power BI can do, and the way you would go about doing it is by clicking on this Transform Data tab. And so this takes you to Power Query, and once you are in Power Query, there's a whole slew of things you can do. You can write DAX queries, you can write mQuery, or you can simply use these tools that you have over here. So for example, let's say that we wanted to split this particular source column on the spaces. And so you could simply go over here, split column by delimiter, and you could just bear with me so far. And then you could split by the left, and so you would have options to clean the data this way. You can and you can also do things like replacing values, converting the types. You can also do group bys. You can also pivot the table, things like that.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And the one thing that you can't do, the one thing there's kind of like a limitation on is the speed. And so once you have very large data sets, applying these, so this is typically in the thousands and thousands of rows. Applying these changes would take some time. Time to do for each step, and so that's really a limitation for the devices that we're using. That's really based on your device. If you were to simply use Power BI on on Azure, on Microsoft, on their cloud implementation, you could see, you could limit this, you could kind of overcome this limitation by simply adding in more compute power to your instance.
Oh, so you can use Power BI like not just locally on your desktop. Then you can use it like all through the browser on Azure.
Yeah, you could use Power BI on locally as well, as you said. You can also make some small changes to the report layout and add new visualizations using the Power BI website. And you can also have a Power BI implementation and instance on the cloud on Microsoft Azure.
Yeah, cool. Thanks for the explanation.
No worries. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, I don't see any questions right now. But if there are any more questions, you can feel free to reach out to us via our Facebook page or via the Discord group chat that we have. And yeah, it was great meeting everybody. And if you guys have any feedback or anything of that sort, we would welcome it. All right, and that concludes our workshop. Thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. Thanks for coming, everyone.